All right, welcome to our presentation titled Augmenting Visual Studio Coded UI with Test Automation featuring John Kane. I'm your host, Francesca. Now, before we begin, I'd like to explain how to participate in today's event. You will be watching streaming video and content. To optimize your bandwidth, please be sure to close out any unnecessary applications that may be running in the background. You'll notice a number of widgets at the bottom of your console. Here you may view the speaker bio and presentation abstract. And if you're loving the presentation, send us a tweet through our Twitter feed. Also, please send us your feedback about the presentation through our short 4-question survey. Use the moderated chat function to interact with other attendees, and we are also available to answer any technical questions you may have within the moderated chat. And with that, I will pass things over to John.
Virtual stream. Thanks for coming to this presentation. My name is John Kane from LogiGear, and today I get the opportunity to talk about augmenting your coded UI with action-based test automation. So let's get started. So how many of you have been by the Microsoft booth? You see the quality emblems that they're putting up, a very big deal, and especially a big deal in test requirements. So if you look at the test requirements for quality enablement, they come in these 4 categories: speed, maintainability, reusability, and scalability. Let's talk about each one of these. So for speed, you want to be able to quickly and really easily create a large number of tests and not have to maintain them. Want to keep the momentum up on creating more tests without having to go through and maintaining those tests. And that maintenance comes in when your code changes, when your GUI changes. You don't want to have to go back and work those tests again without having to create more tests. So you want to focus on reusable test design so that you can use it over and over in your entire test suite. And you want to have a less of a focus on test programming. So take the details of programming and C# and put it away and focus on the test flow and the test design of your test cases. And you want to execute lots of data for your test to have good test coverage. So you want data-driven testing to be able to get that scalability of many test cases still using the same small set of test cases that you have. And you want to, especially in an agile environment, you want to be able to enable an understanding of what that test flow is, and so that your team can have collaboration and communication about what the tests are trying to do from a top-down objective level. So let's look at the premise for putting this kind of solution together. We call this action-based testing methodology. It's not just a tool. It's also an organization of how your tests are designed, and it's a methodology for putting together keywords into actions that you can use for your test cases. And let's talk about keyword-driven methodology first. So I think everybody here knows what keywords and actions are. So test developer creates tests using actions, and actions consist of a keyword with variables and variable names and values that define what that keyword is going to do. And then you create your test flow with those actions. You can have low-level actions, medium-level, high-level actions. And the idea is to get as high of a level as possible to get to the business objective of what your test cases should do. And then below that you want to bury away on the right side here is all the low-level coding, the C# code that defines the operation of what those actions are. So action-based testing methodology consists of this technique of gathering those low-level keywords, say they're click, enter, set, the kind of scripting actions that you're used to, and gathering them together into medium-level and higher-level actions. So in this case, I can select multiple low-level keywords, take them, put them into a high-level action called checkout, and then even use that into a higher level action called order entry. So now you're up at the business level and you're not worrying about the low level details of X, Y, and hover and the things that you normally worry about when you're doing C# coding. And what that does is that gives you a foundation for reusability. Now, when you have an action that you need to change, and that action instance is used many places throughout your test suite, just like in good programming, you change that master once, and all instances of it changes throughout your test suite, and now you have a very stable kind of test suite and a very reusable library that you can expand your set of test cases to. So after gathering these low-level actions into a high-level action library, you simply drag and drop these high-level actions into a spreadsheet-like interface, and now you have a very easy-to-understand test flow. We call this entry into a test module, and this test module is a very top-down, organized method of gathering test cases together. So what's the benefit of doing that? How does it scale when you have a large number of tests? Say you have 2,000 tests. You have to create an action library of, say, 200 actions and maybe a couple of custom functions, and you want to double the number of tests. And you'd like to be able to do that without a lot of work. And with this kind of methodology, because of the reusability and the scalability, then the number of additional actions that have to be created is very minimal. And if any custom actions have to be created, then there's only a few. And this is a great way to be able to scale the number of tests that you have without having to continually work that library. But action words need a methodology. So actions and keywords are a great foundation for defining the operation of tests. So here we have a payment system. If we did a bottom-up approach with just those actions but without any organization, we still end up with a big bucket of tests to do, and even if we try to apply objectives to that, then it comes to be still a large job to be able to manage that. So what we want to do is apply also an organization, a method for modular test design on taking those actions and keywords in creating those tests. And that starts with a test development plan. And with a test development plan, you want to think about what are your business level objectives. So these are top-down organization of how you're going to create your eventual tests. So what are my business level objectives? What things do I want to test? What kind of test suites do I want to have? Do I want to have smoke tests, functional tests, UI tests, non-UI tests? Do I want to access data from SQL servers? All those kinds of things, but you think of it from a top-down point of view to be able to, number one, achieve your business objectives. And those are sorted into test modules. So the key here is that a test module is the main vehicle in Test Architect. And that test module, they're all independent. And they consist of objectives that are business objectives that can meet the business needs of your application. And within those test modules, you gather all the test cases that are dependent on each other. So they're all linked, they're all of the same scope, and they all are contained within a test module. And this is the best way to scale into hundreds or even thousands of test cases, because now you have not a big bucket of test cases, but a bunch of modules that are very organized and very structured. And then you apply the actions and keywords that we talked about with an action library. You have an interface to your interface mechanism to your application so that your tests and your application are separated. And then you apply that to those test cases. and you run them in an automation engine. The key here is that the automation engine is separate from the development engine, and that's the only way to be able to hook into the multiple environments you have with different browsers, different platforms, different OSs. You want to keep that separate from the test. You want to be able to develop your test and have a single test that goes to all of those platforms. And the way to do that is put that configuration in the automation engine, not in the test development area. So what this does is it provides you a very scalable and reusable technique for growing the number of tests you have and to get to test automation. And it's really suited for very large, complex, enterprise-level kind of applications. Smaller applications or just a small GUI application, maybe this is not the best technique, but it's very scalable for the large enterprise-level test projects that you have. So these are test modules with very readable and understandable test flows that everybody on the test team can understand, and now everybody can communicate with each other and know exactly what those objectives are for each of those modules. And with that team involvement comes collaboration and communication and better teamwork working together. But most of all, this is an emphasis on test design and not on test programming, more about the test flow and the test project organization rather than the tools and the technology. So now that the many test cases that we had with the many objectives in a big bucket, now we can organize those in a very good fashion, apply that methodology, and get an organized modular test design where everything is in test modules, business objectives, top down, and now you can scale your test cases to the size that they need. And then the third part is the tool itself. So you want to have an architecture and functionality that uses that methodology and uses the functionality of the organization to be able to round this functionality out. And so that is Test Architect for Visual Studio. And so the premise, again, is back to the quality enablement, but to be able to provide speed and usability and reliability and scalability. So the first way is to be able to an architecture that separates the test development from the automation and be able to have a harness to be able to implement third-party tools or the physical functions or the different platforms that you have that you want to integrate to that test. And again, you have a single test that can integrate to all of those different environments. And you have an integrated system that fits right into the quality enablement process. And so the continuous integration flow of defining and developing and operating your tests, this fits right into that flow because very early in the cycle, especially if you're in an agile-like environment, as soon as the specification for the application is started, you can start on those test modules without even defining the lower level actions that you need. So very early in the flow, while you're doing the scrums, while you're doing the weeklies, you can apply this methodology. And then it fits into the continuous integration environment with TFS and MTM. So you can build your tests, check them into TFS, and in MTM, name what your tests are. You can bring steps in from MTM, maybe the deferred items that you have in your Agile environment, bring them in as steps, apply them as steps in your test cases, and then you can run those test cases outside of the Visual Studio environment in MTM and see the results. So it's a continuation of that continual integration environment. And a couple other aspects of Test Architect for Visual Studio especially where you have fragile test scripts that are linked directly to your application. You want to be able to protect those scripts so that when your application changes, all your test scripts don't break. And you have to go and do a lot of maintenance on those test cases. The best way to do that is with an interface, and Test Architect for Visual Studio provides an interface where you have a logical name that's linked directly to the test cases, and then your interface has all the properties and parameters to be able to link to the application, and a bunch of really good spy tools to be able to access that application and find out what objects you want to connect to, what controls you want to connect to. And then doing data-driven testing. Of course, many tools do data-driven testing. You want to be able to do this efficiently with as many filters as you need to so that you can apply lots of data to one or only a few sets of test modules. The idea here is you don't have to write a different test module for each set of test data in your SQL Server. You can have a single test module, all the test cases are related, and you can run all of that data, filtered or not filtered, to that test case. And then fits right into the Visual Studio 2012 test environment. It's an extension into Visual Studio, puts the templates right into the Visual Studio environment. And that fits right into the Microsoft Test Manager and Team Foundation server environment. So all of those working together. And then very specifically drilling down to the coded UI level in the UI automation part of Visual Studio, then the coded UI part and Test Architect for Visual Studio sit side by side to be able to implement any kind of UI-driven test, and it has its own kind of test case association, just like MTM has. And so you can run your test cases inside the Visual Studio environment or outside that environment in MTM and TFS. And so that integration looks like this, where you simply associate those test cases and run them in MTM and get the same kind of tools that you have in MTM to view the status of your tests and then view the results of your tests. So let's go through a very quick kind of demo example. Here's a coded UI example that uses Tailspin Toys, which is a Microsoft web page. You can see many of these, this example and other examples in the virtual machine that Chuck talked about in the last presentation. But if you visit the Microsoft booth, they have all of their tools on virtual machines. Test Architect for Visual Studio is just an ISO that's hooked right into that, and you can see this kind of example there and get a real-time look at it. And you can also see this in our booth. But we have a website where you can, say, purchase some toy airplanes. And the coded UI, as you might know, looks like this. It's a very good record and replay kind of methodology. And some of the issues are that if that website changes, if the code changes, if the GUI changes, then you have to go back and manage all this C# code. And some of the test developers are very good at this, and that's great. And some test developers don't want to deal with the programming aspects of coded UI. So instead of all the methods here and the parameters and the properties that you get with the C# code, another technique is this action-based testing technique. So let's go through that. With the same website, you simply do a click on multiple places, just like you do in coded UI. And then you gather those together into a set of low-level actions. And then these can be made into a high-level action. So here we've done 3 clicks to order a plane, and it's in the shopping cart. And then we're going to just take that and we're going to create a higher-level action called, add plane to cart. Something very understandable and readable that everybody on your test team can see. If they looked at a click, they would have to actually go over to those properties and parameters and try to figure out what's going on. Here they say, oh, add plane to cart. It might say the kind of plane and just pass that in as a variable. And then take that add plane to cart high-level action, use it in a test module, just drag and drop it in there, and now you have a very understandable test flow, and you can compare that to what you have in coded UI. So you have, in this case, one high-level action that is the same operational activity as the coded UI that you have, and then you can expand that to do multiple planes or have another high-level action that will have multiple planes and then add your test case out. So that's a good example of a very short example of the comparison of coded UI to this action-based testing methodology. And so the idea is to augment. It doesn't replace it. It helps you with your coded UI. You'll still need to use your coded UI for the areas that you want to do low-level, XY, hover, detail kinds of things. But here you can also expand it up to the business level and be able to augment your coded UI with this action-based testing automation. And the idea is it's in a single integrated environment, this Visual Studio environment with lots of great tools, and then also in the continuous integration environment of TFS and MTM to be able to manage and run those test cases outside of the development environment. And that test development gives you a fast and easy to use method for creating those test cases and managing those test cases, making them reusable and maintainable, and then automating those test cases and be able to scale that and customize that for your third-party controls that you can't do in your current solution. So Test Architect for Visual Studio is the solution. Please drop by our booth and see a demo and get more information, and please drop by Microsoft's booth to see the same. We're very good partners with Microsoft, and we work closely with them. If you want more information, please go to testarchitect.com, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thank you very much.
I have a question from our virtual audience. John?
Okay.
Okay. I have several. How does a test development plan differ from a typical QA test plan?
So how does a test development plan differ from a QA test plan? Is that right? Okay. So they're very similar. The test development plan is probably of higher level, higher scope, and so you have to really, from a business level, determine what the scope of your test cases want to be. But you'll run into a lot of the same aspects when you get to the medium level and low level. But the test development plan is a much broader. What are the high-level business objectives of what I want to achieve with this application from a business point of view?
Okay. And the second one here is, what version of Visual Studio does this tool currently work with?
Yes, that's a good question. So the version of Visual Studio came out with coded UI in 2010. It was just a fantastic addition. And we started working with Microsoft back then, and Microsoft convinced us with all the great functionality they were adding into Visual Studio 2012 that we would put the Test Architect for Visual Studio in with 2012. So going forward with the great functionality that was put into 2012 and the entire TFS MTM environment, Test Architect works with Visual Studio 2012.
Have another? It's a long question.
Okay.
Coded UI tests. Microsoft examples add a test project into the existing C+ solution. This is undesirable as dev teams do not want to check into the source control that the solution with QA added test project. So what is the solution?
Okay. So I was wondering if you could read the first part of that question again.
Of course. This person writes, coded UI test, : Microsoft examples add a test project into the existing C pound, I said plus earlier, I apologize, C pound solution. This is undesirable as dev team does not want to check into the source control. It is worded a little interesting.
Okay.
So they don't want to check into the source code. What's the alternative?
Okay. So
test project.
yeah, no, that's fine. So yeah, coded UI is all implemented in C#, and actually all the actions that we talked about and all the keywords are also implemented in C#, but it's code that's put away. It's all the details that are put away. And so going to this action-based testing methodology brings that up to a higher level. The source control functionality is still there. When you do the build, it still does a build, still does a check-in. You can still manage that in TFS, and you can still run those in MTM. They're compiled down to DLLs, and they're run just like coded UI is run. And so the build process is the same, and it uses the same build engines that are in Visual Studio and MTM. TFS. Hope that answered that question.
Or can we use this tool on a virtual machine?
Yeah, so that's a good question. On a virtual machine, as you know, Microsoft has made virtual machines available with all of the Visual Studio 2012, and Test Architect for Visual Studio can be put on that. In addition to that, we have many customers who actually run in their environment. They'll, of course, create and execute tests in their local environment, but they want to execute those tests while they continue their development. So they'll start up 250 virtual machines, and there's a lab manager, of course. MTM has a lab manager also. You can manage the test cases that way and run them on the virtual machine. And Test Architect has a lab manager to be able to manage those test cases and run them on virtual machines or real physical machines around the world.
Okay. What's the pricing structure for the Test Architect for the licensing fee?
Okay, so price structure is, I won't say specific prices because it all varies, but price structure is that you can create and run test cases within Visual Studio, and that's a full license. We also have what we call a run-only license for Test Architect. For Test Architect for Visual Studio, it actually creates an agent license, so it all uses the full licenses. But in a Test Architect only environment, we have a full license and a run-only license kind of environment. And so you buy the product and you get maintenance free for the first year, and then you pay maintenance after that.
Okay. Does the coded UI support Dev Express controls for functional test automation?
So Test Architect for Visual Studio is tied very closely to coded UI, and there are some third-party controls that it does do and some that it doesn't. In fact, some coded UI controls aren't even seen. So we try to follow coded UI very closely, but there's a harness built within Test Architect for Visual Studio, and we call that scripted actions. And with those scripted actions, you can write any .NET kind of language, but of course in that environment, so it's like a C# language, and you can implement a third-party controls that aren't actually seen built into the tool. So it's a custom, that's where the custom action library comes from, and it's kind of a harness where you can build a scripted action for that third-party control.
All right. Do you suggest that QA teams make a copy of the dev team's entire source code to a different location and then insert coded UI, or then insert coded UI tests project into the C# solution? If so, how do you keep in sync with dev team's code change?
So the Test Architect for Visual Studio is really a test development environment, and so the normal test management environment that you normally use, and that includes the source control and how you manage that, is really not the main focus of Test Architect for Visual Studio. There's all kinds of tools in the Visual Studio environment to be able to control and manage that, and so Test Architect for Visual Studio augments that by adding the test development portion of that equation of creating your tests.
Where can I get, or where can one person, anybody, not just one person, where can people get more examples with keyword-driven samples to create reusable libraries?
Okay, so there's several examples out there. Of course, you can go to our website. We have lots of literature, and Hans Boalda is quite, our CTO at LogiGear is quite influential and famous in this area, has many articles and books, and we can just come to us at the booth. He's actually at the booth now, and come to us at the booth and we can provide you more information, or on the virtual, in the virtual lab we have all kinds of collateral there that you can pick up, and then just call us up and ask us specific details on keyword and action-based testing.
Those are all the questions we had. Thank you so much for answering those from our virtual audience.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody in the virtual audience, and thank you, everybody in this audience. I really appreciate your time coming here, and hope you have a good time at Star East. Thank you.
All right. That wraps up our event. Thank you for joining us. Please check the presentation center for other presentations and their start times. And don't forget to join us for our live interviews between presentations. See you at our next event.